Hi, we're going to take a look at special right triangles. Our learning target is to be able to solve for sides of a right triangle using special right triangles 45, 45, 90, and 30, 60, 90. Our first one's going to be 45, 45, 90, and if we take a look at the note, it says that the legs of a 45, 45, 90 triangle are always congruent. So if this length is x, this length is x, that means these sides are congruent, and the two opposite angles are also congruent, making this an isosceles right triangles. And a 45, 45, 90 will always be an isosceles right triangle. So let's say our leg is x, then the shortcut is if I multiply the side length by radical 2, that will give me the hypotenuse, which would be x times radical 2. Well, let's see why this is. If we do Pythagorean theorem, where it's x squared plus x squared equals h squared, h for hypotenuse, I combine my like terms to get 2x squared is equal to h squared. And then to get rid of the squared, I take the square root on both sides. So h would be equal to, well, the square root of x squared, well, those would cancel out. So I'd be left with x. And then the square root of 2 is still a decimal. So then we leave the 2 in the radical. So the hypotenuse is equal to side times radical 2. So there's a little proof using Pythagorean theorem. And now we can go ahead and apply that rule to solve for the missing sides. So if 8 is one of the side lengths, then that means x is also 8 because it's an isosceles right triangle. For y, we would take that length and multiply it by radical 2. So y would be 8 radical 2. In our next one, we have 25 is a side length, and you notice that y is also a side length, and these are congruent because it's an isosceles right triangle. So y would be equal to 25, and then I take that side length and I multiply it by radical 2 to find x. Now in number 3, it's a little bit different because we're given the hypotenuse, and then we have to use the hypotenuse to find the missing side. So remember that to get the hypotenuse, so think about that. Hypotenuse is along a side, so I multiply the side to get the longer side. So multiplication will get me a longer side. However, if I have the longest side and I need to find the shorter side, that means I'll be dividing. So I'd have the hypotenuse is equal to that little shortcut, x times radical 2. So that means I have to divide by radical 2 on both sides. However, one of the rules is we cannot leave a radical in the denominator, so I have to multiply by radical 2 over radical 2. So then if I simplify that, both x and y would be 19 radical 2 over, and then radical 2 times radical 2 is square root of 4, and square root of 4 is just a regular 2. So it'd be 19 radical 2 over 2. So this is equal to x and y. Now if we take a look at our next part, 30, 60, 90, notice that this is not isosceles because we have two 30, 60, and 90 are all different angles. So that means we have a shorter leg, we have a longer leg, and we have the hypotenuse. So those are the three distinct lengths, side lengths that we're going to label. The shorter leg is always opposite the 30-degree angle, and the longer leg is opposite the 60-degree angle, and the hypotenuse is always opposite the 90-degree angle. So the shorter leg would be opposite the smaller angle, so this let's call S. The longer leg would be opposite the 60, so I'm going to call that L, and the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle, so I'm going to call that H. Okay? So whenever we use our shortcuts, we use x as the shorter side. So we always start with the shorter side. The longer leg would be x times radical 3. And to find the hypotenuse, you just take that side length and multiply it by 2. So one more time is find the shorter side first. Okay? then use short leg to find rest of sides. Okay, so if we take a look at our first example, notice we're going to identify the sides first. Okay, actually I should write that first. So I'm going to put a star here and put identify short side, long side, hypotenuse. So this is your short side, opposite the 60 is your long side, and the hypotenuse is opposite the 90-degree angle. So we have to find the short side first. Because it's given to us, it's 5, then I multiply the 5 by radical 3 to get the long leg. So x would be 5 radical 3. And again, I'm just using these rules to help me figure out what these answers are. So short leg times radical 3 will give me the longer leg. And to find the hypotenuse, we just multiply our 5 by 2. So 5 times 2 is 10. Okay. Now, in number 5, let's see, they give us the shorter side again. Well, that's convenient because it's the short leg times radical 3 to get the long leg. And we multiply the short side by 2 to get the hypotenuse. So in our case, x represents the hypotenuse. So it would be 2 times 14, which would get us to 28. And then the long leg would be your short side times radical 3. In number 6, label your sides. We have 32 is the hypotenuse, x is the short side, and y is the long side. So we have to go backwards now. We have to use the hypotenuse to find that short side. And if I have to multiply to get the longest leg, then I would divide to get the shorter leg. So I would have 32 is equal to my rule, 2x, so 2 times that short side. So I divide by 2 on both sides, and that would get me 16. So that's my short side. Well, using your short side, we multiply it by radical 3 to get the long leg. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at number 7. In number 7, it looks like we have the same thing again. We have 46 as the hypotenuse, we have y as the short side, and we have x as the long side. And just a reminder that the short side is always opposite the 30-degree angle, long leg is opposite the 60-degree angle, and the hypotenuse is opposite the 90-degree angle. So we would take that 46 and we would actually end up dividing it by 2 to get the hypotenuse, or to get the short side. So that would get us 23. So the short leg in this case is y, so I'll write it down there. And we multiply it by radical 3 to get the long leg. In this next example, you'll notice that 20 is the long leg, y is your short side, and x is your hypotenuse. So this is the tricky part because we're given the long leg. So the rule is the long leg is equal to your short side, which is x, times radical 3. So in order to solve, I would divide by radical 3 on both sides. And because I can't have a radical in the denominator, I'd multiply by radical 3 over radical 3. So that would get us, running out of room. So that would get us 20 radical 3 all over 3. Because radical 3 times radical 3 is radical 9, and square root of 9 is 3. So that's why the denominator is a whole number. And that would give us our short side, which is y. So it would be 20 radical 3 over 3. And to get the hypotenuse, we take that 20 radical 3 over 3, and we multiply it by 2. But remember, it's really 2 over 1. So it'd really be 40 radical 3 over 3. So the denominator does not get multiplied by 2, only the numerator. And in number 9, we have the long leg is 9 radical 2, x is the short side, y is the hypotenuse. Again, we have 9 radical 3 is equal to x times radical 3. So we divide by radical 3 on both sides, because if I multiply to get the long leg, then I divide to go backwards to get the short side. So those divide out. And look, the radical 3's divide out. So that means my short side, in our case is x, is equal to 9. So x is 9. And then you double it to get the hypotenuse. So y is 18.